Tower of God is one of the most highly advertised yet narratively rushed shows in recent memory. A fact we know to be true because Crunchyroll advertised the hell out of it like it was the next big shonen masterpiece, despite the series only getting 13 episodes based on an original material that's been ongoing for almost a decade now. Once again, I find myself in a precarious position. One where the fact that I rarely read the original material ends up becoming a focal point. Tower of God was based off of a Korean-written manhwa from all the way back in 2010, adapted into English on Webtoons in 2014, and currently it has enough chapters to it that shows it's been more or less a weekly release for much of the last decade, putting it alongside most modern shonen in terms of sheer content volume. Before this 2020 adaptation came out, the excitement and hype for this series was immense. However, after only 13 episodes, the show has, at least for the moment, come to an end, and throughout the entire release of the series, one thing was made perfectly clear to me online. Manhwa readers were not happy. It's something that I have gotten used to over the years with anime, the somewhat high and mighty position that the manga is always better. And if only the anime creators used the original material as a storyboard and did everything frame for panel, then it just would have been fine. Usually this opinion appears depending on what the person was first introduced to. If your first impression of a work is in a particular way and you have come to enjoy it that way quite heavily, then naturally you will be averse to changes made to this favorite thing of yours. Very rarely in any medium, not just anime, have adaptations surpassed their originals. So the backlash, if you want to call it that, was not unexpected. It always happens. But here with Tower of God, I felt so much more hatred than just the usual disgruntled voices about an adaptation. So allow this to be a disclaimer. This video is not a comparison between the manhwa and the adaptation. I'm not going to say what one did better than the other or anything like that. My goal for today is to cover this adaptation for how it stands on its own. I may reference what I know about the manhwa to possibly try and explain some of the issues that I found with the anime, but largely I want to look at what these 13 episodes accomplish without anything else required. Naturally, of course, if you end up enjoying this series, then I can do not much else but direct you towards the manhwa, and there will even be a link in the description for that. But if this series has positive points or negative points, it'll be because it's an anime, not because it's an adaptation. Hopefully that's enough of a flame shield, but we'll have to see. So today, ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection, where today we are talking about Tower of God. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. We at Glass Reflection would like to give a shout out to not just the sponsor of this video, but for the whole review week of awesome for 2020, Surfshark VPN. A VPN, for those who haven't been watching the videos that I've been putting out this week, I know who you are. A VPN is a way that you can protect your privacy and what you view online as you surf the web. Surfshark keeps no records about what you do and makes sure that no one else is going to do that either. You can also use it to change your digital location to that of another country to bypass pesky region locking. Is content you want to watch blocked on services such as Netflix and YouTube? Well, using Surfshark, they can be accessible simply by connecting to a local server from the country that you would like to access. For example, you can also use Surfshark to access Disney Plus. But why would you want to connect to Disney Plus? I know all the Star Wars fans are talking about freaking Mandalorian and Ahsoka Tano right now, but that's not anime. But. I have it on good authority that soon what Disney Plus will have is one of the greatest anime of all time. Cory in the House. You don't want to miss that, do you? I didn't think so. You can also, gain access to things like Verve and watch Tower of God, I suppose. There will be a link and a promo code in the description where you can sign up for a percentage off, as well as an extra 3 months free because we like you guys so much. And thank you very much to Surfshark for sponsoring. Now, back to Tower of God. The basics of the story are not hard to grasp. There exists what is called the Tower of God. What happens or exists outside of the tower is unimportant. What is important is that whatever you desire can be found at the top of it. But not just anybody can climb it. Those who have previously reached the top of the tower, the rankers, administer tests to determine the worth of individuals that wish to climb. And even then, they are only permitted to take the test when chosen by the tower's guardian. Unless, of course, someone is powerful enough to enter the tower from the outside. Our story follows one such person, Bomb, who enters the tower following in the footsteps of his childhood friend Rachel, who was determined to reach the top of the tower and see the stars. Bomb is granted admission to the tower by its guardian. However, it is noted that he is an irregular, someone from outside of the tower. And because of this, he will have a harder time than most in his journey to climb. But he will also be hunted down if his origins are made public to those he meets. What do you need to know about Bomb? Well, there's not much to know. He's a guy that had amnesia. He only really remembers his one friend from before the tower, who he puts an almost absurd amount of faith and trust into, so much so that he has devoted his whole life to her. Yeah, that's not gonna backfire. He's not particularly strong or skillful, but he has an unofficial luck stat that helps him get out of tough situations without really having to try all that hard. It's not that Bomb is a bad character. I just found him to be quite uninspired, especially compared to nearly all of the characters that surround him. A lot of criticism has been laid on the anime adaptation of this story, with manhwa readers complaining about how a lot of the unique storytelling was removed, only to be replaced with a more traditional shonen style of narrative. While it has been long enough since I read parts of the manhwa to fully agree with that statement, in the case of Bomb, he is one of the most shonen protagonists to ever protagonist. Bomb does very little in the way of direct actions throughout the series. Instead, he as a character has this type of natural charisma that makes people do a lot of the hard work for him. Bomb doesn't do things that change the story. Things happen to Bomb that change the story. And that's a very significant difference. I think it wouldn't be as noticeable if it were not for the testing aspect of the series. When you test characters, most of the time, depending on the test, you are looking for them to act a certain way. But Bomb doesn't act. He reacts. In fact, throughout all 13 episodes of the series, I would say that Bomb has made exactly 3 actions that affected the story. In episode 1, he chased Rachel into the tower, thereby starting the narrative as we know it. In episode 5, he saves Rachel from being attacked at the cost of the crown game and potentially his own life. And lastly, in episode 13, he saves Rachel once again from certain death. Noticing a pattern here? With those exceptions, things happen to Bomb that he reacts to rather than him acting on his own impulse. Once inside the tower, he gets told not only to fight this giant eel in a cage, but the caretaker even convinces the newly introduced Princess Yuri to give him the Black March, a powerful sword, which she only agrees to do seemingly because he is handsome, and she is interested in him for some reason. If Bomb acts at all, it's because someone told him to do something, rather than him deciding that it's something he needs to do. It's almost as if he's a puppet for someone else's ends, which honestly wouldn't surprise me given the nature and attitude of a lot of the players in the narrative. The problem with that, though, is that it makes it hard for me to like him as a character. Tower of God is filled with interesting characters, all with what feels like tomes of backstory barely scratched at by the show. But Bomb is our protagonist, despite being, honestly, the least interesting one of the bunch. All of the mystique about Bomb doesn't come from what he does, but rather the mystery behind where he came from and why he was allowed to be here in the first place. He's like an Abrams mystery box of a main character, one that the narrative keeps teasing but doesn't seem to have any intention of opening anytime soon. There are just too many questions about him. We aren't shown where he really came from. Rachel just found him. His only goal is to follow Rachel like a simp all the way to the top of the tower because that's where she wants to go. The narrative doesn't challenge him enough to make his own decisions. Like if Bomb had to choose between Rachel and his newfound friends of the tower, what would his choice be? Would he be conflicted at all? What would be the result of his mental state because of that? We don't get those questions because it's not how the story is laid out. That is not the plan. This narrative really likes plans, specifically those of its characters, both shown and implied. Some of this is obvious, like how Kun ends up lelouching his way through the majority of the show's obstacles, dragging his new friends, including Bomb, along. Like how various antagonists move players in the tests around, like chess pieces to achieve their own ends. But the intriguing thing about most of these plans is that we don't, at this introductory stage, get a reason for why. Some of the why is easy. Hell, many of the cast's motivations are partially explained at the start of episode 1 before we even know who they are. Reaching the top of the tower is like receiving a wish-granting MacGuffin, and everyone has a reason for why they want their wish granted. but it's the characters that we don't know the answers for that are the most interesting. What was Yuri doing on the ground floor of the tower, and why did she take an interest in Bond? Was it because he was an irregular, simple curiosity? Did she see a new piece of the game that she could influence? The tower's head administrator of testing. He clearly has motivations behind how the tests are laid out and aligned, but while he says his actions are for the good of the tower, we don't really know if that's because there are things that are clearly good and not good for the tower, or if it's because he believes himself to be good for the tower. So then anything that benefits him personally is also in benefit of the tower. And then there's Rachel, who wishes to see the stars, to shine brighter than any of them, despite the world telling her constantly that she can't. But why? Is she simply frustrated by a lack of positive circumstances in her life? Jealous at the inequality presented to some people but not others? Or is it something else entirely? There is so much to these characters that is worth exploring. Enough that it would be foolhardy of me to attempt to compare most of them to your typical shonen cast, because they just have so much more depth than that. But my issue with the story of Tower of God is not that any aspect of it is bad, but that it seems to take great pride in just how complicated it really is. When talking with manhwa readers, one of the major complaints that I heard from them regarding the show was the pacing. That the show blitzed its way through entire chapters, leaving much behind in its wake. And, I can totally see that from just watching the show without any additional context. While all of the pertinent information does seem to exist within the show, it's not always presented in an easily digestible way. Instead, it presents its world like how back in school, the teacher would want us to copy entire paragraphs of information from the board or an overhead projector, but because there was just so much information, we as students just had to blitz copy all of it down so that we wouldn't miss anything as they moved to the next board or slide. We saw all the information as we quickly scrolled it down, but we couldn't process the information because we didn't have the time. This essentially forced us to take the time to reread through all of it later. So in this case, Tower of God is a series that heavily benefits from a rewatch. But it's really frustrating that for some people, a rewatch is required in order to understand things, rather than just, taking the time to make it easier to comprehend from the get-go. Like, I get it. There's a lot of information. At the time of writing this video, there are 484 chapters of the manhwa, and that's what has come out over 9 years of almost weekly content, and attempting to condense all of that into just 13 episodes is foolhardy. I don't know what the decision was behind the episode count. I don't know if that was a production issue, a lack of financial backing, perhaps a lack of confidence in the material's popularity with a more global audience. Who knows? There are so many explanations for why anime have the amount of episodes that they do. Like, even just look at My Hero Academia, the massive juggernaut that show has become in the shonen world. It just started off with a single core season. That's it. It ended up getting the majority of its seasons after that. So now Tower of God just becomes a question of if there was value seen in this adaptation enough to justify a sequel. But not just that, a sequel with enough episodes to actually properly continue this at a decent pace. And I really do honestly hope that that is the case. Like, I think I've been very clear so far in laying out a couple of my problems with this series, and some of them are more foundational issues, but I have seen stories that have come back from this just by having more content. Ask yourself, how many long-running shonen in history would have gotten as popular as they were if they only got 13 episodes? Would My Hero Academia have the same notoriety to it with only 13 episodes? Would Fullmetal Alchemist? Would One Piece? Sure, all of these properties had the advantage of massively popular manga series in Japan, but from an anime standpoint, none of these shows would have been anywhere near as good with only 13 episodes. So obviously, with Tower of God, with its measly one season, it can't compare. But I can watch Tower of God, and I can see the depth of it. I can see the gears turning in the background, the setup for further stories with these amazing characters, and I desperately want to experience them. I know the manhwa is available. I know that if I really want to know just the story, then it's easily available to me, but I want to see that story in motion. I want to feel these characters through the performances of their actors, to hear this world through its phenomenal soundtrack and sound design. I want anime to be treated with as much care and attention that its original material receives because I personally find it to be just that much more enjoyable of a medium. I started this video by saying that I would not be comparing this adaptation with its source material, and that's largely because I wish we didn't have to. I am not the biggest fan of anime with this much potential behind them left to sit after only a cour. I hope that we get more of it. I hope that the producers of this show not only decide to continue the series, but give it the time it needs to tell the story that exists. But I fear that such a thing is impossible. That even if we do get another season, eventually it'll stop being profitable. That we might get a season 2, but that's it. Which will leave me in the same position that I'm in now. I enjoyed watching Tower of God quite heavily. I enjoyed watching it more than other shows that I have recommended people to watch this year. But regardless of that, it's a show that I can't recommend at the moment because it doesn't end. It's a peek at what we could have from, by all accounts, a very well-developed story and world. But it's not that. Not yet. Of course, what I can do is recommend for you to go and listen to the soundtrack, because that's available on Spotify, and it's one of the better ones from this year. Topped only by the soundtrack for Dawn of the Deep Soul, which, surprise, was also done by Kevin Pankin. He's a stand-up bloke, and he writes good shit. What can I say? I can't help but support his work. But, yeah. Sorry for this downer of an ending. If it's not obvious already, I can only present Tower of God with the recommendation to stream it. It's not good enough to buy. It's missing too much to place it among the best of the best. But it's not so completely without entertainment that it's worth skipping entirely. It just needs a continuation. One that is well-paced, that allows the world to breathe a bit. Otherwise, well, the manhwa will always be available. For alternate anime recommendations, I really only have one. For all of the flaws and executions for Tower of God, there is still a depth to the world that is unseen in many other similar shows. The closest I can recommend fully is, of course, the popular shonen adaptation of Hunter x Hunter from 2011. It's a series that I couldn't get out of my head as I continued to watch Tower of God, with its tests and challenges. But Hunter x Hunter has over 100 episodes to show you just how great it is. Which just makes it a depressing comparison. But if you do check it out, hopefully, you will find it to be to your liking. Lastly, a very special thank you to all of my patrons who not only support my work in general, but allow me to continue to do what I do, and for that, I'm immensely thankful. I do love and appreciate you all. Specifically, though, as I like to do, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons Sid Yamako, Wago221, Calhoun Boy, Hector Montemayor, Rune Jacobson, and Ryfin Bonaparte for being especially awesome. You guys are great. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.